I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Woke up this morning to the Donald's tweet of, well, commanding us to have a great but reflective President's Day. And I got to be honest, I did have a good day. I don't think I had a great one. Had a good one, thanks. Wasn't great. Got some things accomplished, but I did have a very reflective President's Day. I did. Reflecting on the legacy of Donald J. Trump as one of the worst presidents in history. And it's not just my view. It's not my position on him solely. It's the position of about 170 members of the American Political Science Association's Presidents and Executive Politics section, who evidently filled out a New York Times poll of where the presidents all seem to fall. And last is where the Donald came in. Now, the last poll done was 2014. So newcomer Trump, obviously the last. A pretty good accomplishment. Way last. Not even close to Buchanan. And Buchanan's got to be going about damn time. Because understand, Buchanan's the guy who kind of led us into the, he was the Civil War president just before the Civil War, and there's all that. Crazy. And deserved to be last. I thought Herbert Hoover, they put way higher than they should have. Great Depression guy. You kind of got to wonder. Now, Trump has been bad, and while I think he's terrible, I still think Hoover and Buchanan should be below him. He hasn't done anything yet. Not that I'm trying to encourage him. Not that I'm trying to, give him something to strive for. I don't want him to work on being the worst by, bombing North Korea or starting a nuclear war. That would be much worse. That would definitely put him worse off than the Great Depression and the Civil War. But you've got these folks who are the members of the American Political Science Association who are saying he right now the worst. Now, Democrats overwhelmingly put him at the bottom of the list. Independents have him second from last, and even Republicans put him 40th of 44. So interesting. He's only fifth from the bottom. Still four places for him to fall in Republican view. Now, Obama jumped 10 spots from 18 to 8, which, you go, it's kind of not surprising given the fact that you're comparing him to your replacement being just absolutely crazy and just off the edge. Surprisingly, Bill Clinton dropped 5 slots. Yes, I believe that has everything to do with Monica. Honestly, truthfully, I never saw him as a great president. I would have not put him in the top 10. So he would have had no worry from me falling that far. And it had nothing to do with Monica. Honestly and truthfully, it was probably one of the better things think he did. Not trying to cause trouble. Policy-wise, he was terrible. I agree. I disagreed with the welfare reform. I disagreed with NAFTA. I disagreed with the crime bill. I disagreed with a bunch of that stuff. Telecom bill, end of Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the end of Glass-Steagall. You can go down that list. But on this President's Day, it's interesting to have those conversations about the best and worst. Lincoln, Washington, FDR, always 1, 2, or 3, depending on. It doesn't really matter where you are. 1, 2, 3, somewhere around there. Lincoln, Washington, FDR. Teddy Roosevelt, 4th in this poll. Thomas Jefferson, 5th. Truman, 6th. Eisenhower, 7th. Obama, 8th. Reagan, 9th. Disagree with that choice. LBJ, 10th. 10th, a little too high for me. Great Society stuff, good. War on Vietnam, not so good. Ramping that all up, not so good. So it was a day to reflect and to think about, the reasonable presidents of the past, and is this the beginning of the end of the future? I don't really know yet. We will see how things go. Now, our president spent the weekend playing golf. Not too far away from where just a horrible shooting occurred, but that didn't seem to bother him any. And it's just crazy. And what's nuts to me is, one of the first stories I woke up to today was a story that came out of this place called Neosho, Missouri. Tiny little town there, trying to raise money for the 9-year-old and younger boys baseball team. And what are they doing to raise money to buy little jerseys and get bases and little balls and bats? Because understand, bats are really going to be expensive. Anyone who doesn't know, if you have a baseball bat, it can never be used in league play ever again after today. Every bat this season forward has to have, I think, the American Baseball Association or something written on it, or it's no longer allowed to be played in any league play. So they've just now created massive inflation in the bat world, and all bats of the past are now deemed useless, which when I was a kid, we used broomsticks. Now we have to have bats that are certified, approved, and, well, $200-300 a piece. Just nuts. Anyway, but, you got to pay for these things. So how do they propose to raise the money to buy little bats and balls and all that stuff and hats and uniforms? Let's have a raffle. It's a great idea, have a raffle. What should we give away? Let's give away an AR-15. Just like the one that was used in the last several shootings. Because, hey, what better could you do for your school community than give the next crazy person the gun to come in and shoot it up? What could possibly be better than that? Now, the guy who has done this, the guy who put this forward, said obviously they were doing this before the shooting happened, and they feel horrible. But now they're going to try, and you cannot make this up. The belief here is he's going to try and turn it into a positive thing. Yeah, more guns are a positive thing. Somehow, if we put more guns in kids' hands, it's going to be a great thing. Now, as he points out, and I've heard this from the right wing a lot, these gun raffles have been going on for years, and evil exists. And I agree, evil has always existed. I actually knew kids who, if you would have given them an AR-15, they would have shot up the school. Do you know why they didn't shoot up the school? Because they didn't have an AR-15. I knew kids who brought knives to school. I know kids who, if you would have given them the opportunity, they would have done it. But you know why they didn't do it? Because Grandpa didn't have an arsenal full of AR-15s in his basement that you could snatch. In fact, they didn't even really have AR-15s back then, and they weren't available to people on the street. Now, you did have people who would go in with a 6-shooter, and they would shoot their 6 bullets and then try and reload and then get tackled and beat up. That happened a lot. It's the guns, stupids. It's that simple. I know, but Rick, guns don't kill people. Yes, they do. Stop that nonsense already. So now you've got every one of these idiot groups out there going, we're going to sell guns. And I've always said it's a dumb idea because you're now going to give a gun to someone who didn't want it. You've now saturated the entire society with guns. And people, like, I remember, going to work and guys going, oh, we got a raffle going on at our blah, blah, blah club. We're giving 20 guns away. And I'm like, why? Can you give me the money instead of the gun? Well, no, you have to take the gun. I go, I don't want the gun. Well, you'll have a gun. I go, but I don't want one. got to have it anyway if you win. Then I'm not playing. And some guys would just play. And I remember one guy who played, he won, and he said, well, I'll give it to somebody down the road. Great. We're just going to hand the gun off to somebody else without knowing whatever happened to it. And I watched a video today of a guy who, he was actually very clear-headed. He was a self-admitted, gun nut. He was somebody who had an AR-15 pre-ban. You go back into the 80s, and it was registered and all that stuff, so he was allowed to own it through the ban. He actually took it to a chop saw and chopped it in half. Said, I've had the epiphany. I've had the epiphany that it is the guns after all, and we have to get rid of these. And I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation of, we have gun control. We have arms control in this country already. So for all those people saying, I got the right to bear arms and cold dead hand, you've already lost. We have arms control. We do. I know. But the Second Amendment says I got the right to bear arms. Yes, in a well-regulated militia. And also, we've drawn a line already. The argument today is not whether or not to have arms control. The argument is where we draw the line. And the line is, to me, honestly and truthfully, the line is pretty simple. It's pretty simple that the line should be on this side, the sane, rational side of assault weapons. It seems to me that the line should be drawn on the side of, sorry, we as a society are incapable of having military weapons without somebody losing their ever-loving freaking mind and going and shooting up a school or two or their workplace or whatever. And there was just a study done, most recently, a guy did a study for his book that points out that, before the assault weapons ban, we had 19 incidents of mass shootings, if you will, that caused 155 people to lose their lives between 84 and 94. The 94 assault ban into 2004 saw 12 incidents with 89 people killed. Since we undid the assault ban, thank you, George W. Bush, we've had 34 instances that have cost 302 people their lives. So, very simple math. The ban worked. And had we continued, it would have continued to go down. Except, no, we went the other way. And in fact, you had the NRA and every crazy person all along the way, not just saying, hey, we're going to get this semi-automatic weapon back. Can't wait for this wonderful killing tool. But we came up with bump stocks and we came up with kits to make them fully automatic. And then you've got people who want to have silencers. So even better yet, because we don't want to hurt the hearing of the mass murderer. It's bad. And I look at this and I just go, we need absolute leadership. We need someone who's going to step forward. And the question then becomes, will this president be the guy? The Washington Post reported on Sunday that Donald Trump went to his resort there at Mar-a-Lago and evidently was going around to the membership quizzing them about what he should do on the gun issue. And I immediately thought, this is exactly what the founding fathers, this is how the founding fathers envisioned policy to be done by. Pulling a bunch of rich people drunk on a dance floor in an exclusive private club. Hashtag original intent. And this is kind of where the Koch brothers and their ilk, when you see the Scalias of the world talking about original intent, this is what they're talking about. This is how they envision policy to be done. A bunch of rich people in a private club behind closed doors dictating what they want. Now, I would argue every person in that club, every person at Mar-a-Lago should be going, you know what? Inequality is getting bigger. The gap is getting wider. Maybe we should have arms control because those poor people might come after us with guns instead of shooting each other. So Trump comes out and says, the White House came out and said that Trump's supportive of improved background checks. And I don't know what that means, but maybe it's a start. I don't know. All I know is I saw pictures coming out from a hospital room with a bunch of smiling people and Trump giving the thumbs up, and I don't know what he's thumbing up, and I don't know why he's smiling like. My grandfather used to say like a smiling, like a possum eating you know what. That's kind of what it reminded me of, especially with the hair. So the question is, are we at a moment where change is possible? Evidently, Harvard just came out with a poll, and their polling says that millennials right now, their attitudes towards gun laws have changed dramatically since the last Las Vegas shooting. And you look at what's gone on in Parkland, the millennials, are they the ones right now who are going to stand up, step forward, and say no more? In fact, the Harvard IOP polling shows momentum among millennials already building for stricter gun laws after little change followed Tucson and Sandy Hook mass shootings. They say in 2017, 61% of those 18 to 29-year-olds, they support strict gun laws. And I look at this and I got to wonder, this Emma Gonzalez came out and said that, either you're funding the killers or you're standing with the children. And you look at these politicians who finally someone's pointing to them and saying, this is your fault, that you're not doing anything. And the thing is I'm still looking for someone sane and rational who's a gun nut. And I know that's kind of off the kind of deep end, sane, rational gun nut. It's kind of polar opposites. But I'm hoping that one of them come forward and say, look, I like going, I like shooting my gun. I like having them, like this guy who chopped his AR-15 in half. I'm still I still want to have my rifles and all those things. But these weapons got to go. And getting away from the NRA, maybe starting something a little bit saner. Look, there's even, we've been saying for a long time, the NRA, has been funneling money from the Russians probably for years. And the question is when do we say stop? When does it end? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are we pro stopping this insanity? Are we in favor of getting rid of these assault weapons? Are we in favor of getting rid of these high capacity magazines, which I think have to happen? Or, is it the Wild West? Because every gun person said, no, what we need to arm more people. More people with guns are better outcomes. It'll be safer. It'll be great. I fundamentally disagree with that. But I'd love to hear your thought. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andrea Chalupa is going to be here. We're going to talk a little bit about the indictments on Friday. Rick Gates, Manafort, the Trump cabal, and who may fall next. Who are they aiming the indictment gun at next? Quick break. Right back.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day streetcar workers in Philadelphia walked off the job just as garment workers were ending their victorious strike. The walkout soon turned into a general strike. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electrical Railway Employees Local 477 had been trying to negotiate fewer hours, higher wages, and union recognition for almost a year. Philadelphia Rapid Transit broke off negotiations in mid-February, fired 173 union members, and imported scab replacements from New York City. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees called workers out. Strikers pulled apart buildings under construction and used the materials to block tracks and build strike shelters. Many trolley cars were badly damaged when the Philadelphia Rapid Transit attempted to resume service. Scab drivers fared as badly as the trains they attempted to run. The mayor called for citizens to serve police duty after strikers loaded dynamite onto tracks in Germantown. The union offered up its members to preserve order, but the mayor refused. Then, the Philadelphia Rapid Transit brought in an additional 600 scabs and National Guardsmen to protect them. Area workers were infuriated at this latest move, as were small businesses and religious groups. On March 5th, the Central Federated Union called a general strike. More than 75,000 workers stayed off the job to protest anti-worker assaults. Though the general strike was called off at the end of March, transit workers stayed out until April 19th. They won wage increases, rehiring of strikers, and mediation for the initial 173 fired workers. They could not secure exclusive union recognition, but the strike solidified solidarity among area workers and demonstrated the capacity of labor to organize work actions across industrial lines. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Interesting weekend of Trump denials and obfuscation and distraction and shiny stuff. And, of course, the partying going on in Mar-a-Lago. But, hey, never mind all of the negative stuff. On Friday, though, big news. Friday indictment day. 13 Russians indicted, 3 companies. And, oh, by the way, we found out that Gates is flipping. And that's huge news. And here to talk a little bit about why it's so important, I've asked our good friend Andrea Chalupa to come talk with us. Andrea, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Thanks for playing Rage, by the way.
Yeah, so why is this a big deal? Why are the indictments a big deal, and why with the Gates flipping, because now you've got 3 who have flipped, why is Gates important in all of this?
Because Gates is like Manafort light. He has a lot of the dirtiness, the illicit money, and the torturers, lobbyists, clients. But Manafort has been doing it for a lot longer and a lot deeper and has greater influence in that whole sphere. So Gates is still wrapped up in that industry. And so he knows where the bodies are buried, which makes him extremely useful for Mueller. Makes him extremely useful for allowing Mueller to build the pressure on Manafort, who is going to be a very tough nut to crack. Manafort is someone who, as they say, very much has blood on his hands. He was close with the overthrown former president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, who was, considered to be a puppet of Vladimir Putin. And Manafort, in advising him, was basically helped bring to power Yanukovych, who was a Trumpian president who stole an estimated $100 billion. He and his family and his little crony circle stole an estimated $100 billion from the Ukrainian people. And there's, a violent uprising, which Yanukovych, tried to crack down hard on. People were tortured, kidnapped, killed. And so, Manafort being a sort of a hand to the king of Yanukovych, very much is sort of complicit in that violence, that human rights crisis of Ukraine's revolution. So Manafort is somebody that just simply doesn't care about the loss of life, whether it's to enrich himself, his clients. He was on contract for many years, a $10 million a year contract with the Russian oligarch Deripaska, who's very, very, very close with Putin. And Manafort's job was to further the interests of Putin's government. So all of this is to say that Manafort is in this so deep that I have a hard time believing that he will ever flip. Like, he's somebody that reminds me of like he'll go down firing. So anything that Gates can provide Mueller to sort of put that extra pressure on is obviously key. And anything Gates can provide Mueller as well to ring in the Trump family, to ring in Trump himself. So it was a historic day, since this whole 2016 crisis has unfolded. Definitely Friday was a massive victory of progress for the FBI, as we've learned.
Because I've been looking at this, and as you pointed out, I don't think Manafort ever flips, and I don't think that I think he's done so much that I don't know that you could give him the kind of deal that would allow him to flip. And I don't think we should. He should never get immunity or off on most of the crimes that we've heard he's committed. So the question is Gates enough? Do you think? Does he know where all the bodies are? And is this that huge piece of the puzzle that inevitably brings Trump and the Trump campaign down?
Yeah, I mean, we know Gates and Manafort were very close and, in working together, and Manafort was still advising the transition team, which was managed by Vice President Mike Pence. Flynn was a part of that team as well. Ivanka was involved in that as well. So this is like, these guys were, the clown car, the Kremlin clown car, driving into the White House and just, committing a lot of stupid acts out in the open. It was very easy, for instance, for Michael Flynn to get caught calling the Russians, calling the, Ambassador Kislyak 5 times in a single day when Obama, announced sanctions. So they must have known, given how the sort of web they were working in, that they were being monitored, given their interest to the FBI. Manafort certainly by then was being investigated by the FBI because the FBI, upon Ukraine's invitation, was brought in to help search for the missing $100 billion that Yanukovych stole from Ukraine. So Manafort was already on the FBI's radar and being investigated at this point. So anybody around him sort of doing similar deals, conversations overlapping, was getting caught up in that net. So I think Gates certainly was traveling in these, and working intensely and under the fishbowl scrutiny of the Trump transition team, the early Trump White House. That there's a lot that we can be confident in that he knows, and there's a lot of people that he could sort of help Mueller bring in, certainly.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that Trump tweeted out today was, and it's now the right-wing frame in all of this, that, Barack Obama was president up to and including the election of 2016. All of this stuff went on his watch. Therefore, it's actually Obama's fault for not stopping the meddling and not doing anything, which I think what they're trying to say is the reason we haven't done anything in the last more than a year is because they didn't do anything. So, we're not guilty as they are not guilty.
Well, Trump is very guilty for a number of reasons. I mean, there's research pointing to the fact that he is on track to be one of the most corrupt presidents in American history. So he has a long list of, things he's guilty for. In terms of Russia, he is an open ally to Vladimir Putin. He refused to enact sanctions. He selected Rex Tillerson, who has a long friendship with Putin, to be the Secretary of State. And Tillerson right away went to sort of purging the State Department and weakening it and getting rid of programs like fighting corruption, empowering independent media in developing countries, programs that Putin hates in his own backyard. Tillerson got rid of those. So there's a long list of ways Trump has been benefiting Putin, and one of those is also embarrassing the United States, humiliating the United States with the constant horror headlines that come out of the Trump White House. Trump also attacks our allies. And Trump just gives Putin a pass and praises him and refuses to be critical of him on any single front. And the two of them will have conversations, casual conversations when they have to be at a conference together. They'll kind of go off on the side, and Trump won't follow protocol, which could lead to, security issues for the United States. So no, Trump is very much behaving as somebody who is grateful for Putin's help in helping him get elected. As for Obama, that is a conversation we should be having, because Obama's isolationist foreign policy, his naive overreach foreign policy, I think those factors certainly did contribute to the situation we are in now. And a very excellent documentary to watch on that is The Final Year, which just came out, and that follows Obama's final year in office, looking at his sort of wide-eyed, optimistic, naive foreign policy team. Ben Rhodes especially, who went from being an aspiring novelist to the right-hand man to the President of the United States, and really driving a rosy-colored glasses foreign policy for the U.S., which completely underestimated Vladimir Putin, his determination, and his absolute greed, and just having a singular agenda where he just wanted to infiltrate other countries to benefit not necessarily Russia, because Russians were investing all this money into sort of infiltrating, for instance, like the U.S. since 2014 with this massive far-reaching troll operation, for one example, and doing all these things to sort of wield his power on the global stage. Meanwhile, that's money that could have been invested into the Russian people. Russia is at a decade high of the number of Russians living in poverty. What we learned from Mueller on Friday in the indictments is that the Russian operation to infiltrate our election, the budget for that went up to $1.2 million a month. Wow. And that's massive. And they had a big operation. They had, different departments. They had a finance department, an SEO department, a graphics department. It was like a big company just sprouted up to influence the United States and really hijack our election.
What do you say to the defense, though, that, all this stuff, all the Russian meddling happened long before, Trump announced he was going to run for president? All that stuff was before. There's no way he could have possibly been a party to all this, because it's been going on forever, and it's what they've been doing.
Well, Trump was the perfect asset for the Russians, because he was for years talking about running for president, and he attempted to run for president in 2012. And so, he had it. Trump running for president has been out there, discussed out in the open for years. And he's somebody that just fits the psychological profile of somebody who could easily be blackmailed and manipulated, just through basic flattery, through sending around porn stars. He's such an ideal mark for the Russians that it's not surprising that they would sort of develop a relationship with him over time. So I think the dates you really want to look at to sort of see how all of this sort of heated up between Trump and the Russians are how he was over there in 2013 for the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. Putin was getting a lot of heat when he passed the anti-gay laws, which were very aggressive and for against Russian citizens. And there was a huge global outcry against Putin's anti-gay laws. And suddenly, like a week later, out of nowhere, Trump announces his Miss Universe pageant. So here comes Trump giving them exciting PR, getting involved with the Russians despite this horrible human rights crisis of the anti-gay laws that Putin had just passed. And then he comes back in November, and that's in November 2013, and then sort of tensions start heightening between Russia and the West with the Ukraine crisis. The revolution breaks out in Ukraine. Putin, in reaction to that, invades. Sanctions get passed against Russia, and that's in 2014. Then that's when you see like this whole troll bot army really being launched, taking off in a very aggressive, far-reaching way. And so when they're ready for Trump, it would not surprise me if he was essentially activated through Manafort, through others around him. There's a long list of pro-Putin Russians, Eastern Europeans who are around Trump and Trump's circle. It wouldn't surprise me if they sort of lured him in to get him to run when they needed him. And in fact, that's something that a member of the intelligence community shared with me immediately after the election, during a time of great crisis when all of us were sort of working the phones and trying to figure out, what do you know, what are you hearing? And that was sort of when that was a discussion I had with someone from the IC at that time. So yeah, no, it's scary. It's very scary what we're dealing with right now with a Russian asset in the White House.
Let me ask you this. I mean, because I've always taken the position that they're very clever. I mean, I had a CIA former CIA agent tell me, most of the time when you've been gotten, you don't even know you've been gotten. Is it possible that he, in his mind, doesn't believe he's done anything wrong and was actually played beyond his ability to understand?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and you're absolutely right about all spies from different countries. That's pretty standard to build a psychological profile on someone so you can manipulate them. That's standard. I have a friend who works in for one of the big agencies, and when the Chinese hack came and took everything, that U.S. government workers had to sort of provide like massive intimate background checks. The Chinese now have that, which they can use to sort of influence our agents out in the field. So yeah, so it's obvious that that's something like Trump is an easy nut to crack for anybody, and he's somebody that has shown just a struggle with reality, and we've known that for a while, and it was emphasized so strongly when he claimed to have like the largest inauguration crowd in history, and he claimed that it was like a sea of people. And he claimed falsely again that when he came out to speak, the sun came out, when instead it just started raining when he came to the podium. So he's someone who repeatedly is divorced from reality, and so he could have been in on the thing, in on the entire conspiracy from the beginning, and just have such a level of dementia, or such a a personality disorder that he can't even accept reality, because we see him being unable to accept reality in the way that he governs as president.
Yeah, I agree, because I've said from the very beginning, I don't know that he was involved. I believe Junior and the son-in-law and all of them being ambitious and arrogant and not very bright on top of it. I believe they have they're eyeball deep in this. I'm waiting to see how this all plays out. So last line of questioning I've got then, because this is we're moving quickly forward, and the hope is that we see something before the 2018 midterms. What kind of time frame are you looking at this thing wrapping up, or Mueller, the next set of indictments, or any thoughts?
Well, Mueller bagging Gates is a big deal. It very much is, because Gates was a soldier for that team. So he's a gift that could keep on giving for Mueller. So what we're seeing is Mueller is going for the low-hanging fruit first and sort of building his way in, circling in. And it does seem to be accelerating. Like this indictment on the 13 indictments on Friday were a massive statement by Mueller, just outlining just one aspect of the scope of what the Russians did. It's just one aspect. This was not simply a campaign of Facebook, Twitter ads, and bots. No, there's far more to it than that. Which we can go into, which we have gone into in other conversations we've had. But it's a wide sweeping investigation. There are multiple investigations, and Jared Kushner is the next low-hanging fruit. That's just so obvious to everyone.
That was going to be my next bit of this. Does he flip?
He's like the next after Manafort. And he has that sort of like the carelessness of a Michael Flynn, and the naivety of a Michael Flynn, and also just like the corrupt dirtiness of a Manafort. And he was in charge of running the campaign's digital operation. And so, he was in the room on the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with the Kremlin representatives and Don Jr. and Manafort. And, he must have been proactive, as he was known to be throughout the campaign, as sort of like the shadow campaign manager. He's very much... My gosh, he's, first comes Manafort, then comes Jared Kushner, in terms of just that fitting that profile of just stupidity, carelessness, hubris, and having your tentacles all over the thing. So that's where my money would be. And of course, that would be a direct shot right into the heart of the Trump family, because as everyone often says, Ivanka is the favorite child. Ivanka is her father, but in a prettier package. So for Mueller to grab Ivanka's husband, that's going to be we're going to be reaching some very Shakespearean levels here in our country in terms of the news outbreak. It's going to be extraordinarily interesting.
And most certainly. I mean, and since you bring up Shakespearean, does Junior flip?
Junior, well, I heard it's so funny because all the dinner parties now, no matter where you are, become just these political salons and try to put the pieces together. And I happen to be sitting in one dinner party in New York City, next to a man who was very quiet and sort of listening, and he finally contributed and said, I'm friends with Don. I went to college with him, and I finally caught up with him like in spring of 2016 for lunch, and I was just like, man, what are you doing? Like, what are you guys doing? This is crazy. And he's like, yeah, I know. And just sort of, and the reason why it was so crazy, he was saying, is because Don Jr. never had a great relationship with his kids. We know that. That's well known. But, Trump was not a great dad. And I've heard stories in New York City, from people who knew the kids growing up or at one point in their lives. And Trump was basically divorced from their lives except for, financial support. So for them to sort of emotionally, there's not a lot of emotional risk there, one can imagine, for them to like turn on their father for the sake of their own children and their own families. His dad has had a good run, but I do think that Donald Trump does have some Teflon on him, which we've seen repeatedly. But I do think the people around him don't necessarily have that same Teflon. So I think the net is going to be cast wide, and I think he's going to leave a trail of people he's going to stab in the front, just let them fall to Mueller. I don't know if Trump survives this or not, because I just don't know. But I do think Kushner would be a solid contender for getting an indictment soon, as well as Don Jr. And if you look at Brad Pascal, who ran, who worked on the digital for the Trump campaign, he wrote some passive-aggressive tweet coming out and saying, he tried to act like a cheerleader, saying that not a single decision was made when it came to the Trump campaign without Jared Kushner's approval. And it made it, the way he wrote it was in a sort of fake tone of like trying to boost up Jared. But what he was really doing, of course, was throwing Jared under the bus.
Yep.
And saying, no, this was the guy. I was just a minion. Because Brad Pascal probably saw the lawyer bill that he would need in order to defend himself.
That's an excellent point.
I don't deserve this. It's like it should go to that trust fund kid, Jared, who got himself into this mess.
Well, it will be interesting to see. Andrea, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing some thoughts. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
Always good stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. And if you had theater tickets that evening to see Beauty and the Beast in Seattle, the show did not go on as planned. Musicians at the Fifth Avenue Theater, members of Local 76-493, had been on strike for a week. At issue was their compensation for performance. The union believed their wages were far below the industry standard for similar markets. The theater managers refused to budge. The union went out on strike, canceling 8 performances of the much-anticipated Disney Broadway musical. But this was the last night the theater stayed dark. Management brought in replacement musicians. The curtains rose with the scab musicians playing inside, while the picketers marched outside. The Musicians Union had a long history in Seattle. Local 76 was first formed in 1898. 60 years later, they joined the Black Musicians Local 493, integrating the union for the very first time. 18 members of the Local 76 participated in the Fifth Avenue Theater strike. 4 additional Disney musicians refused to play. Community solidarity for the strikers was strong. Each night, hundreds would join the picket line. ovations as a brass band played outside the theater. Violinist Libby Poole Presley was impressed by this show of support, saying, "I was floored. Here were hundreds of people helping us out in a stunning show of labor and community solidarity. To us striking musicians, it felt like magic to have the power of that many people behind us. The magic of solidarity helped the musicians win a contract victory and end their strike." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, a little email bag. Janice writes, "Rick, you asked Andrea why didn't Obama do something about Russian meddling, and she didn't answer it. What did Obama do?" Well, as I remember, Obama did issue sanctions. If you go back to that time, everyone was all crazy about, "Oh, you can't do that." And the Republicans were all up in arms. Mitch McConnell and the rest of them were all, "Oh, you can't do that. This is, putting the thumb," and all that stuff. And understand, this is the same kind of sanctions that Trump decided not to implement here recently, that were overwhelmingly passed by Congress last year. If you remember, and I do, I think it was July, the Republican-led House of Representatives voted 419 to 3 on these Russian sanctions. 3 people voted against it, 3 Republicans, Justin Amash from Michigan, John Duncan Jr. from Tennessee, and Thomas Massie from Kentucky. In the Senate, it passed 98 to 2, with Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders being the only 2 to vote against it. And Sanders' view of it was that if we followed, Trump's path, he said, following Trump's comments that he won't recertify Iran's compliance with the nuclear agreement, I worry new sanctions could endanger it. So his idea was, I'm worried about the Iran deal. We don't want all that to blow up into war. So we're going to vote against it, even though it was overwhelmingly passed. So there were sanctions put into place that, of course, now are no longer there thanks to Donald Trump. And if you need a reason why the Russians wanted Trump over everybody else, that's it. And everybody that they backed to push forward against Hillary Clinton was specifically to put Trump into the White House. Also, Obama threw out, and you may remember this as well because everybody went crazy, threw out about, I think, 35 Russian operatives, diplomats, you call them what you want. Threw them out of the country, down the road, and closed 2 Russian compounds. And you may remember the scenes of the Russians leaving in the limousines and all of that stuff. Also, according to Joe Biden, they actually tried to reach out to Mitch McConnell and the Republicans to do a joint statement, a joint bipartisan statement to the Russians saying, hey, cut it out. Cut the crap out. We know you're doing it. Our intelligence agencies have caught you doing it. You're caught red-handed. Stop. And obviously they didn't. But when you're already divided, what message did that send? So right from the beginning, through back doors, through back channels, the Russians already knew we were divided. And they had already won. Because you couldn't get the Republicans to say anything about it. Now, also, Obama, had he come out and said, hey, look, American people, the Russians are tipping this election towards Trump. I want you to be aware of, the bots. I want you to be aware of all of the counter stuff that's going on, all the fake tweeting and all of that stuff, all the bots, all the fake news, all of this stuff that the Russians are operating out of an office in Russia. I want you to know that it exists and it's all going against Hillary. How bad do you think the right wing in this country would have lost their ever-loving freaking minds? you would have heard people whining and complaining and carrying on like never before. So he was in one of these spots where you got to do something to make sure that, you know, they don't rig the election, but also you can't come out and be outwardly political. He was in a tough spot. I personally would have probably done much more, but that's a calculated decision that it's easy to sit here and decide. Now, you've got a president right now who hasn't uttered the word and has tried every justification to say none of it existed, it doesn't exist, until it exists, and now it's Obama and the FBI's fault. If you haven't noticed, it's now all Obama's fault. It's now the FBI's fault for not doing anything. Not once in his Twitter tirade over the weekend did he actually condemn the Russians, who he now has to admit, because everybody said it, their indictments, all of his intelligence people are saying it is what it is. Not once has he condemned the Russians for meddling in our elections. Not once. But he's gone after Obama and all of the intelligence agencies and attempting to, just destroy and belittle the FBI. So, I'm curious if someone's got an idea of what more Obama could have done without it being viewed overtly political during an election. Because he was trying to juggle those balls. And he thought, like a lot of people, not me, but he thought, like a lot of people, that Hillary was going to win. Didn't happen. So now we're in this moment. And you even have some Republicans now who are going, uh-oh, they're going to do it again. And, you don't have the evil Hillary there anymore. They could be coming after us next. And, oh, by the way, who knows what more they have on the Republicans? Because I said from the very beginning, when the DNC got hacked, when Podesta's emails got hacked, I said from the beginning, trust me. And again, you don't need a crystal ball. You don't need to be a genius to figure this out. Trust me, that's not all they got. I guarantee they got RNC stuff. I guarantee they got Mitch McConnell stuff. They got Paul Ryan stuff. They got Republican stuff, stacks and piles and files and warehouses full of stuff. Because you just don't gather evidence on one side. You just don't gather blackmail on one side. You gather it all around. Tony has an interesting email that caught my attention. He starts off by talking about guns. He says, a tipping point in guns. I think Florida school shooting may have opened an outrage against unregulated guns. He writes, hearing Emma Gonzalez's speech was eye-opening. Finally, a survivor of a horrific, life-changing event is openly condemning politicians who take money from the NRA. He goes on to write, multiple actions planned in the coming weeks. I hope the anger can be sustained like the 1960 student protests against Vietnam, which brought attention to a terrible war we couldn't win. And now evidence is surfacing that the NRA was laundering money from Russia to GOP candidates in 2016, which we've talked about before. He goes on, this generation may finally bring about the change we need. Plus, Reverend Barr from North Carolina, thousands of new faces running for office, especially women. Occupy Wall Street, Bernie Sanders. I think the tide is turning. He says, lastly, one last thing, if the NRA is laundering Russian money, what about ALEC? Or the multiple Koch-backed outfits like Club for Growth, Commonwealth Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, etc., etc. Inquiring minds want to know. And look, I've been saying for a long time, oligarchs will be oligarchs. They don't know national borders. They don't know flags. They could care less about that. They know money. They know greed. They know power. That's what they know. They know control and dominance. And again, flags and borders mean nothing to them. So it would not surprise me in the slightest, because we already know there's a lot of Russian money flowing through a bunch of these right-wing media groups. We already know there's a bunch of Russian money flowing into, propping up some of these spokespeople. We get this. And, every time you turn around, there's a new Americans for Dogs and Puppies. There's a new euphemistically named group with curious positions and no idea how they're being funded. And everyone just assumes it's the Koch brothers. But you know what? The Koch brothers are a global entity. They're an extraction all around the world. Would not surprise me if part of their little cabal and their little brain trust was funneled also with a bit of Russian oligarch money. Would not surprise me in the slightest. Because you look around and you look at the power and control that is now in the hands of so few. And I've been asking for years, when do we finally push back against it? When do we get average, everyday working people into Congress, into the halls of power? Because there aren't many there. I think someone told me there were like 5 actual working people in all of Congress. And I don't know the exact number, but something like 5. And you go, how's that possible? In a representative democracy, how is it possible that you have so few people who know what it's like to walk in the average guy's shoes? Just kind of makes you wonder. Good news today out of Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court here has issued their map for the May 15th primaries. And it looks like, according, you read a bunch of the talking heads and the quote unquote experts, it looks like the map could end up with Democrats picking up a couple of seats. Right now, of the 18 seats, Republicans control 13 of those seats. 5 are controlled by Democrats. There's a couple of people who are saying, this could be, Democrats could have 7, maybe 8 seats if all goes well with the blue wave. So you could end up in a scenario where, look, you could end up with 8 seats to the Republicans' 10 as opposed to, 5 and 13. It'll be interesting to see. Now, the interesting part to this is that the map, how they drew it, is interesting. Pennsylvania has 67 counties. And of the 67 counties, I guess only 13 of them are split into other districts. There are, I guess 3 districts have, or 4 counties are split into 3 districts, 9 are split into 2 districts. And it changes how the map is divided in Philadelphia. So no more goofy kicking Donald. So no more creative, mapping all over the place. They tried to stick to the compact and contiguous. And in doing that, the Philadelphia area really becomes, I would argue, more representative of the area. Instead of, like I said, you take all the Democrats and you put them into one district, and you color around, and you pick out all the Republicans and put them in another district. That's not good for democracy. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Republicans do next. Everyone is expecting the leadership here in Pennsylvania to file a lawsuit. Everyone's expecting it to go to the Supreme Court. The question is what does the court do? Do they go the route of setting it aside and having this primary with the old maps? This is going to be the interesting part of it. And what about the primary? This is the thing. This is the thing with having this kind of the scenario where everything's up in the air, because now all of the people who are running for this year's election, for this primary, they've got to go back out and get petitions signed. So you've got to, and it's going to happen, I guess, here within the next week or so, you got to go out and get signatures. And I don't know if anyone's ever done that. It's not easy. You try getting 1,000 people to sign anything is a lot of work. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays itself out. I'm encouraged because I would like to see more representative democracy. I would love to see more competitive districts. And I've said before, a number of times, I'm not against gerrymandering. I'm really not. If the goal and the purpose is to create competitive districts where people are fighting over ideas, and the best ideas win. Not who can color the best gerrymandered map. Not who can color in and make all the weird Rorschach test figures to give yourself the most advantage. Just seems sane and rational to me. But we'll see what happens next. It's just Absolutely incredible stuff in my view. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you listen on stations that pick up the first hour, head on over to thericksmithshow.com for hour number 2. For everyone else, quick break. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since the prehistoric ages and the days of ancient Greece, one down to the Middle Ages, planet Earth kept going through changes.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Have a great but reflective President's Day. That was the command I woke up to this morning, and while I had a good day, didn't have a great one. And while I had a good day, I did spend a lot of time reflecting on this administration, reflecting on, well, just how bad they have been. And also, trying to figure out the question, that Trump keeps throwing out there. Why didn't Obama do more? Not that he can do anything, not that he's going to do anything, not that he even admits anything happened. Just why couldn't that other guy do something? And here to help us work through some of that, I've asked our good friend Propane Jane back on the program. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So did you have a great, reflective President's Day?
I guess. I mean, I didn't reflect at all on how great of a president Trump is, if that's what he wanted us to be doing. I don't know what he wanted us to reflect on. Did he want us to reflect on presidents past and how far we've fallen? Did he want us to reflect on, how terrible of a job he's doing, how low his approval rating is, the Mueller indictment? I mean, we could just keep going on and on. I don't think he really wants us reflecting on his alleged presidency.
Or all his dalliances with porn stars and playmates and all that stuff.
Right. I mean,
either.
This is a day that we don't want to think about that at all.
Did you see the New York Times survey, of the worst presidents?
No, I didn't see it.
Not surprisingly, Donald Trump is the worst overall, which, I got to be honest, as much as I don't like Trump, I just don't know that he's worse than Buchanan or Hoover. But, at this point, okay, I'll buy into it.
People have short memories. I mean, in recent times, no one can fathom. And maybe we haven't had as much exposure to the inner workings of a president's mind. I mean, I guess this is sort of an experiment. I mean, seeing him in real time just put all of his thoughts on Twitter. I mean, there's a level of intimacy there that I don't think any of us were expecting to.
Oh no, I expected it. No, I expected him just to be every bit as crazy as he's been with the Twitter and the tweeting and the dysfunction and the chaos.
I think that I expected that there would be someone around to sort of say, hey,
yep,
this looks so bad for you, and this is actually not helping you in any way, and that there was maybe just a shred of self-preservation there still for him, that he would go, okay, maybe I am overexposed in that way.
Yeah, I would have thought that Ivanka would have been able to come in like a good little nursemaid and kind of direct him and tap him down a little bit. She just hasn't been able to do any of that.
Nobody has. John Kelly hasn't. I mean, it's just this is what we have.
Right.
And
in fact,
there's no going back.
Yeah, when Kelly took the gig, one of the first questions I asked is, does Kelly straighten him out, or does Trump corrupt him? And it just looks like Trump has corrupted him.
Oh, of course, he's going to corrupt everyone that's around him, because how else do you function in that environment? You sort of have to basically comport with whatever feels right for him. And it's an inevitable hostage negotiation, no matter how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. So what about it? Why didn't Obama do more? I mean, you know, that's the defense. His defense first was there's nothing here. It's all a hoax. Nothing existed. There's nothing to see. Move along. And now it's the defense of it's all Obama and the FBI. It couldn't possibly be me. It's them. What do you think of that?
I think that this is again Trump trying to deflect blame. I mean, again, just like a week ago, he was going, there was no Russian collusion whatsoever. And so for him to actually jump all the way to, okay, there was Russian collusion, and actually it's Obama's fault because he didn't do anything to stop it, already sort of just proves how much BS, he was saying prior to now taking this new position. And I think that, when you think about like McMaster and some of these really, big-name people, Tillerson within his administration, the fact that they have been coming out in full force in recent weeks to say, hey, yes, Russia meddled in our election, and yes, they're planning to do it again in 2018. And it's sort of leaving the ball in his court to actually do something about it. But at the same time, he's up against the wall. I mean, this is somebody who is not enforcing the sanctions against Russia, and has really not taken any steps to address the meddling in the election because he's compromised. And so what else can he do in this situation besides blame Obama? I'm actually surprised he didn't somehow blame Hillary, which would have been, pretty cute. Considering that she literally called him out on the debate stage to his face,
right,
and laid out every single thing that he was doing. And so when he talks about why didn't anybody do anything, I distinctly remember President Obama talking about this. I distinctly remember Hillary Clinton bringing this up in the debate. And it's problematic because what the media chose to do with that information when it was given to them was basically to double down on emails and sort of, propagating the same Russian propaganda, actually. And so they weren't, they weren't able to get the public and Congress mobilized to actually meet the threat, especially not in the middle of a campaign season where, everything was going to be politically charged, in particular as it pertained to the candidates and their campaigns. And can you just imagine had Obama said, legitimately, when you think about the Comey letter, had he said, hey, we're investigating this. This is something that may be going on between the Trump campaign and Russia. That would have been a you-know-what storm.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the right wing would have lost their mind.
Oh, easily. I mean, it wouldn't have been, it would have been all over. I mean, this would have been another Benghazi. And so I think, again, this just proves how he's between a rock and a hard place. And he really doesn't have a legitimate defense at this point.
No, I mean, he's beyond defense, but, he's going to continue to, to distract and delay and all of that, which is why, again, I think the reason he went after Oprah again. And I'm like, really? You're going to go after Oprah? Someone who's richer than you are? And a woman. I mean, so there's part of me that looks at this that, there's a whole bunch of insecurity here. That you've got this black woman who's richer than he is, that seems sane and rational. Let's attack her.
Well, yeah, and she's also somebody who, is being discussed as a potential contender for 2020, even though, she's saying she doesn't want to run. And I don't think she actually will run for president. But I think that he feels intimidated by the mere suggestion that she should. And that, she would be somebody who could go against him toe-to-toe, given the fact that she is also sort of an outsider, someone who is a business person and has done well in business, who is a TV personality, so to speak, and who is a celebrity. It sort of turns the whole, idea of the mystique of Trump on its head. And so I think in that way, that really is intimidating to him. But I think at the same time, what was actually, again, he's always projecting. And so I think him calling her insecure was really a reflection of him feeling very insecure about not only her being someone who could potentially run against him, but also the fact that in that setting, I mean, she was sitting down with voters and basically discussing, his presidency to this point, and how did these voters feel about the choices they made then versus, what's going on right now. And I think that there may have been things that came out in that interview from the voters themselves and her probing of those voters that was unflattering to him. And that's not something that he wants to contend with.
No, I mean, anybody who's ever done anything that the media reports on, I remember, when I played baseball, you'd see writing things in the newspaper. The first thing that they always tell you is never read the clippings, and never read the comments. Never, ever, ever. And you would think someone would tell him, someone who is very thin-skinned to begin with, don't read the comments. Don't even look at it, because it's only going to make you crazy. And it's obviously made him absolutely crazy.
Oh, for sure. And this is why I always, focus so much on his daily activities. What is he doing with his time? How is he, focusing his mental energy? What is he spending it on? And what he is spending it on is cable news and Twitter. I mean, he wants to know what people think about him. And again, when we talk about personality disorders and there's sort of this, kind of confusion people have, and they don't necessarily understand that personalities most certainly are a form of mental illness, and that they can cause significant impairment in functioning, because when you take, for instance, somebody who's a narcissist, and that person is so obsessed with their image and what people think about him, that basically they can't actually get their work done because they have to turn on the news and they have to see, well, how are they reporting this story? And what is the take on me in this particular situation? And no matter what's piling up at his door in terms of work, in terms of the actual work of presidency that he's supposed to be doing, he actually cannot move forward in his day unless he gets that feedback, that positive feedback. This is why they're giving him that propaganda document that basically, culls together all of the, the most positive headlines they could find from the right-wing media. They're doing this because he literally can't function. And I work a lot with patients who have addiction, and when you start thinking about someone who's addicted to heroin or someone who's addicted to cocaine and how it becomes such a function of their life, we say very much the same thing that we're sort of presuming people need to be saying to him about his cell phone and his Twitter account, that, hey, yes, I know it feels good to you to get high one more time and to get that feedback, but ultimately this is turning out to be a very bad thing for you. And so no one is able to tell him, to put the phone down or to stop watching cable news, because for him, he literally just, he can't even put one foot in front of the other unless he gets some type of, feedback to his narcissistic supply.
Yeah. I get pitches from all kind of different PR people, pitching one book or another. And a couple of weeks ago, I remember a psychologist was pitching a book where they were talking about the dangerous effects of NOMO, which is, I found out, was no mobile phones. The fear of not having your phone and the actual withdrawal kind of symptoms that people have, just like heroin or anything, alcohol or anything else, from just not having their phone. And I'm going, is this where we've gone as a country?
Yeah, I mean, it's most certainly something that affects everyday Americans. But then when you think about a role as high profile as the presidency, right? I mean, when you think about how many people are looking to you to make the right decision or say the right thing. And for somebody like Trump, who is very thin-skinned and is very self-conscious about, how he's perceived by others, being president, even though it's something that he may have aspired to do, because he's sort of thinking of it as like, okay, like in dictator mind, right? Like that everybody loves him and he's so great, and there's all these parades and just, you know, everybody's satisfied with the job he's doing and he's making America great again. Like in his fantasy of how that's working, there is positive praise, and there isn't any bad news. And if there is bad news, it must be fake news. I mean, everything he's saying, you know, yes, to us it sounds very pathological, but for him, that's literally, you know, what he's having to do to just make himself feel good about himself every day.
No, you're absolutely right. And I got to be honest with you. As a nation looking to him for the right words in times of crisis, we're in serious need. And I look at, you have to know more than look this weekend. Last week we had this horrible shooting in Florida. This week he goes around taking pictures. Did you see the pictures of him with the
thumbs up,
the big thumbs up, and the giant cheesy smile?
What does the thumbs up mean?
I have no idea. And I remember looking at that going, this is our president. This is not the image that I want out there. In fact, I think I showed my wife and kids. I'm going, do you believe this? This is nuts.
I mean, it was so, I think, transparent, right? I mean, because if he sort of, I mean, this is obviously a stereotypical thing that he does with the thumbs up. I mean, there's obviously tons of pictures floating around the internet of him doing his characteristic thumbs up. But the fact that he didn't understand that wasn't a PR moment for him, that his role, I mean, you know, we used to sort of, again, you know, thinking about President's Day, I mean, Barack Obama very much earned the moniker consoler-in-chief. When you think about all of the funerals that he spoke at, all of the eulogies he gave for people who lost their lives in these gun massacres, that was a moment where he was actually going to console people and to try to make people feel better in that moment, and to try to make sense of that moment and to turn that moment into some form of positive action.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine this guy giving that kind of speech?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. And I'm glad that that's not even something that they have even attempted thus far to try to have him do, because it would fail miserably.
I mean, yeah, I'm really sorry this all happened, but we're going to make America great. Aren't I wonderful? Did you see the size of my crowd?
I mean, he couldn't even deliver a speech to the Boy Scouts of America, right, without dipping into this mayhem of his mind. But I do think, you know, there's also the juxtaposition of the fact that this massacre just happened, and you know, he was also partying it up at Mar-a-Lago.
Yep.
And during that weekend, and in the state of Florida, took that time to actually tweet about Oprah, and to still not be focused at all on this massive tragedy that's happened. And I've seen so many high school kids actually tweeting him like, Mr. President, this is your moment. We're actually just children, and we're speaking about this more than you are. We're actually trying to put forth solutions more than you are.
Yeah, did you see the story in The Hill that Trump was in Mar-a-Lago basically polling the drunken members of the club on what he should do?
Yes.
I'm going, really? My first thought was, this is exactly what conservatives want when they talk about original intent.
Mm-hmm.
This is how they think policy should be made, in secret back rooms with drunken rich people.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of us be damned. This is the Scalia, this is the far right-wing original intent mentality working out right in front of us.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, just has to be completely ignorant of the facts on the ground and, like, what is actually happening. You know, as a psychiatrist, you know, one of my biggest pet peeves is that, you know, we talk about gun violence obviously sort of in spurts when these gun massacres occur. But, you know, if you think about it, I mean, like, suicide is a major cause of death in this country. I mean, tens of thousands of people are killing themselves with guns every year in this country. And that's sort of, you know, for the pro-life crowd, that's like a statistic that somehow they can sort of like easily just erase.
Yeah, but then they're going to throw it back at you. Since, you know, Democrats are pro, you know, Roe versus Wade. Well, you're killing babies, so it evens itself out.
Well, but now that's an interesting paradox, right? Because babies are being killed live, basically on television at this point, right? I mean, they're not infants, but they're somebody's babies. These are live children that are trying to go to school every day, and we have people who are voting for people that are, taking money from the NRA to keep guns in people's hands that shouldn't have them. And more of our, living, breathing children are dying every day because of it.
Right.
And again, those people are very serious about saving embryos. I understand that.
Pro-birth.
But those embryos are not living, breathing, in terms of a triage, in terms of when you think about, like, I think in terms of emergency rooms, when you're thinking in terms of crises and what's coming through your, ER, somebody who has, congestion and a cough, you're not going to deal with that before you deal with, the person whose leg just got cut off. And what's in front of us in terms of immediate threat to public safety is these guns and the gun massacres that are happening literally, almost every week at this point.
Yeah. You're from the gun state, because as I understand, Texas has the most guns of any state, obviously, per capita in the country.
Yeah.
What do you do with this? I mean, did the assault weapons ban work as many say it did? Because I argue that arms control we already have it. This whole idea of I have the right to bear arms is limited. To me, it's just where do we draw the line? I'm curious your thought.
I mean, my thought is that, I like to just think of Australia. I mean, we asked that question, does it work? Can a ban on assault rifles work? Well, they had a mass shooting in 1996. They passed legislation 2 weeks later. They haven't had a mass shooting ever since. I mean, people's access to the weapon itself is the reason why people are able to take an AR-15 into a school and kill 17 kids in 3 minutes.
Yep.
Nothing else in terms of an argument trumps just the sheer availability of that weapon of war in civilian hands, and how that just doesn't make sense, I think.
Because as I said earlier, I knew kids that, if you would have when I was a kid, if you would have put an AR-15 in their hands, they'd have shot up everything. And the reason that those shootings didn't happen is Grandpa didn't have an arsenal. There wasn't an AR-15 within arm's reach.
Yeah, and I also think, to take a step back, if you sort of, think about this in terms of not just these mass shootings, but also just in terms of, a more broad national security. And when we talk about our, Department of Homeland Security, and we talk about, you go back to 2009, and the report that came out about these weapons and about right-wing extremists and about the potential for an uptick in gun violence. And here we are, here it is 2018, it's almost 10 years to the date. Everything that report laid out has come to fruition. And they were able to predict that. And so when you think about everything we talk about in terms of social unrest, and we talk about racial division, and then when you couple that with people having access to guns, and you talk about militias and white supremacy and the Civil War, and, like we've talked about, how close are we as a society to some of these issues that we deal with day to day, boiling over into some actual form of armed insurrection, like people are always claiming they want to do, and that's why they have their guns.
Tree of Liberty.
And original intent, like you're saying. I mean, how far are we going to go until, what they're actually saying, that they actually go out there and do it? How close are they to doing that?
No, I can't tell you how many gun nuts have told me, sometimes we need to water the Tree of Liberty with the blood of tyrants.
Yeah.
And I go, have you looked in the mirror?
Right, and who do they think is a tyrant, right?
Let's start
tyrant
with you.
is in the eye of the beholder.
We most certainly live in crazy times.
Yes, we do.
But the hope is, I'm watching these kids, as you pointed out, and the hope is that maybe they're the sane, rational ones that turn this country forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that is certainly an interesting parallel between this and Sandy Hook, that these children are really old enough and aware enough to really feel like this is their time to speak out on this issue. And I'm so proud of them
And social media savvy enough.
Oh, for sure. But you know, I think at the same time, it really is disheartening that they are not being met by adults, actual adults who are in office who have the power to actually make a change. You know, that, you know, they have no will to actually do that. And that's just really unfortunate for them and our future as a country.
Well, hopefully somebody will step forward. Jane, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you. Always appreciate the insight.
You too. Have a great week.
You as well. Thanks so much. Our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Wants me to give my money to someone like you, but I couldn't believe in what a crazy man can do.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day streetcar workers in Philadelphia walked off the job just as garment workers were ending their victorious strike. The walkout soon turned into a general strike. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electrical Railway Employees Local 477 had been trying to negotiate fewer hours, higher wages, and union recognition for almost a year. Philadelphia Rapid Transit broke off negotiations in mid-February, fired 173 union members, and imported scab replacements from New York City. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees called workers out. Strikers pulled apart buildings under construction and used the materials to block tracks and build strike shelters. Many trolley cars were badly damaged when the Philadelphia Rapid Transit attempted to resume service. Scab drivers fared as badly as the trains they attempted to run. The mayor called for citizens to serve police duty after strikers loaded dynamite onto tracks in Germantown. The union offered up its members to preserve order, but the mayor refused. Then the Philadelphia Rapid Transit brought in an additional 600 scabs and National Guardsmen to protect them. Area workers were infuriated at this latest move, as were small businesses and religious groups. On March 5th, the Central Federated Union called a general strike. More than 75,000 workers stayed off the job to protest anti-worker assaults. Though the general strike was called off at the end of March, transit workers stayed out until April 19th. They won wage increases, rehiring of strikers, and mediation for the initial 173 fired workers. They could not secure exclusive union recognition, but the strike solidified solidarity among area workers and demonstrated the capacity of labor to organize work actions across industrial lines.
It's not enough.
So, Crazy PAC is coming up. Yeah. The Conservative Political Action Committee, they're having their big powwow in Maryland at the harbor there, I guess just outside of Baltimore, right? I guess it's going to start on Friday. Donald Trump going to be one of the speakers second year in a row. If you remember, he bailed on them in 2016 as a candidate. Now, didn't want to be any part of that because they hated him. But he's been there the last 2 years, and Mike Pence will be there, the vice president. Betsy DeVos, billionaire Betsy's going to be there. Also Rick Perry, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, and even Sean Hannity will show up and give the faithful his little song and dance. Also, you're going to have Don McGahn, the White House chief counsel, the crazy sheriff from Milwaukee, or former sheriff David Clark, and the French conservative leader Marine Le Pen. He'll be there as well. Now, the crazy people always have their big powwow. Also on Friday coming up, Donald Jr. is going to be in India giving a foreign policy speech. And I don't have any idea why Jr. is giving a foreign policy speech anywhere other than maybe his bathroom. But he is evidently doing a business trip over there. So, hey, let's throw in a little political speech so we can raise a ton of money. Evidently, the little dinner powwow with Junior, about 38 grand a seat. And you go, profit much off of Daddy being president? Because I got to imagine the Trump organization never doing better in fleecing people into just giving them money. It's just, I mean, they're literally selling access. But hey, that's too hard to see. And finally, this segment, evidently we have a, this is just one of those things. It's just maddening. I've said for a long time, anyone who runs any agency in this administration is someone who doesn't believe in it. You look at Rick Perry, who, one of the three agencies of government he wanted to get rid of, Department of Energy. He actually, I think he remembered. He's now in charge of it. You have Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, sued the EPA numerous times to handcuff it and destroy it. Billionaire Betsy, who doesn't believe in public education, she's heading it up. You can go down the list of all of these people who are, Ben Carson, housing and urban development, other than, living close to the projects and speeding through one recently, knows nothing about housing policy. Yet he's in charge of it. So it should not be surprising at all that Trump's top national scientist, is the guy who is the person who's supposed to have all of the scientific information and head up the science portion of the administration, the Office of Science and Technology, is a 31-year-old guy who has no idea of anything that has to do with science. In fact, his degree is in political science. Graduated from Princeton in 2008 with a political science degree. And I guess he has worked for billionaire Peter Thiel. And that's his experience in science. Now, understand, you've got some people, this administration, vehemently opposed to climate change. As I remember, Thiel wasn't so much of a crazy person on that. But here you've got this 31-year-old guy who knows nothing, who is now heading up the Office of Science and Technology. Now, understand, it's been empty since the main position was basically empty since Obama's guy left. And they haven't put anyone in the position. So you now have this guy who's basically ascended to the position from a lower position because there's nobody else. And this is where we are. How screwy. How crazy is it getting? And how much more are we going to put up with? That becomes the question. We'll take a quick break. When we come back and talk a little bit about the Janus case coming up, end of the month, the big Supreme Court hearing case. We're going to find out how it's going to affect teachers in Pennsylvania and across the country. Ted Kirsch is going to be here from AFT Pennsylvania. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
3,000 people screaming out. Where's our government? Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money, we will talk for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations, it's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your
voice is
working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Food corporations and their academic cohorts keep trying to make an industrial tomato to rival Mother Nature's product. And they keep failing. They might consider this instead, the Rutgers 250. It's a revived version of the classic hybrid tomato bred in 1934 by Rutgers University and Campbell Soup. Its excellent flavor and texture made the Rutgers variety the tomato of choice for years, eventually accounting for 60% of all tomatoes grown commercially in the U.S. But it fell out of favor in the 1960s when big industrial growers in California and Florida switched to hard and tasteless tomatoes bred to withstand the crushing power of the harvesting machines they had begun using. The Rutgers variety soon disappeared from grocery bins and was forgotten until 2009. That year, with the good food movement mushrooming and with consumers demanding that supermarkets sell truly flavorful tomatoes, plant breeders discovered that Campbell still had genetic material from the parent plants used 75 years earlier to develop the original Rutgers variety. So, for 8 years, they've been working with it again, using crossbreeding techniques that go back to Latin America's pre-Columbian natives. Slowly but surely, they brought back the Rutgers and its natural flavor, glowingly described as, quote, the very taste of summer. The resurrected Rutgers is not hard enough to be machine harvested and shipped across country, which is one of its major virtues. The fact that this tomato must be grown and marketed regionally is one step toward a decentralized, deindustrialized, and better food economy. This is Jim Hightower saying, instead of trying to squeeze nature into a high-tech corporate model, this tomato represents an understanding that our food system can and should cooperate with nature and foster the growth of regional economies.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. End of this month, the big Janus case is going to be heard in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And as I've been saying, this is a massive fundamental change in U.S. labor law. This is going to be destructive. This could be very, very dangerous for working people. We know that in states that have the whole no rights at work agenda, the right to work laws, wages are lower, healthcare benefits are basically non-existent, retirement not there, working conditions much worse, job security not there. All of the worst things that you can imagine. That's what right to work states bring us. And this Supreme Court case could impose for all public sector workers, teachers, cops, firefighters, the guys who plow the streets and check the water and all that stuff, could impose national right to work. And here to talk about that and, well, what labor's doing to make sure that people are aware of what's going on. I've asked our friend Ted Kirsch to come talk with us. Ted is the president of AFT Pennsylvania. Ted, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for inviting me. And, this social studies teacher, I know we're going to talk about Janus, but today's President's Day, and I think that the listeners should know what some of my favorite presidents said about labor, if you'll bear with me for a minute.
Hit me.
Okay. Abraham Lincoln, and I'm quoting, "All that serves labor serves the nation. All that harms is treason. If a man tells you he loves America, yet hates laborers, he's a liar." And, of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And again, I'm quoting, "If I were a worker in a factory, the first thing I would do is to join a union." And one of my personal favorites, because he was the first man that I could vote for U.S. president, was John F. Kennedy. The American labor movement has consistently demonstrated its devotion to the public interest. It is and has been good for all America. So we've had some presidents that were in favor of labor, not like our present guy. So on President's Day, I thought I would make a comment or two about
Yeah, my favorite Lincoln quote on labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor. It could have never existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is superior of capital and deserves a much higher consideration. For me, that's ultimately my view on things. We have built the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization through the sweat of our brow and the ache of our back and, the emptiness of our wallets.
I am impressed with your Lincoln quote, my friend.
No, I mean, this is what I do. So
okay. Rick, again, before we talk about Janus, I do just want to make mention, and I know there's a lot been said about what happened in Florida at Parkland High School. We know that there were 3 teachers who were also among the 17 who perished, and I want to point out that those heroic teachers that did what they could to help save their students were also union members of our union. So I'd like to point that out.
Well, here's the thing, and I was going to get to all of this because I actually think Janus and these tragedies, all of this stuff is intertwined.
Yes, I agree.
Once you take teachers' ability to have a voice in what's going on and a voice on the job and the ability to speak up and to talk about what's going on, as soon as you do that, you take away safety and security as well. So for me, all of this is intertwined. And you're right. It's such a horrible tragedy that this stuff continues to happen, and we have elected leaders who seem to refuse to do anything on this issue.
Even to acknowledge the root cause of this. Look, I'm not against the Second Amendment. People could have a right, but we're talking about automatic weapons that are not for hunting, weapons that are not for recreation. The laws have got to change to ban those weapons we talked about years ago, weapons of mass destruction. Well, what the heck are these automatic rifles if not weapons of mass destruction?
Well, they're not fully automatic. I guess you can convert them to be fully auto.
Yeah, they do.
These are semi, but you put a bump stock on it, it might as well be automatic. And it's amazing to me, as someone who says, look, I know you have the right to bear arms, but you don't have an unfettered right. You don't have an absolute right to whatever, because we've already got arms control in this country. I can't own a stealth bomber. I can't have a nuclear weapon. I can't have a Tomahawk missile. So to me, it's just where we draw the line. And I would like to see the line drawn a little closer to sanity.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And the question is will these children who have stepped forth so courageously and so in such an articulate fashion, will the marches that are coming up and the day of walkout coming up, will this finally shake our political class awake? Because look, those kids, that generation, that's the future of this country.
And they're going to be voters very soon. They're in high school. Not far away.
Evidently, 4 million of them were born just before Donald Trump took office, and there's a couple million more that are going to come online this coming November.
All right, Janice, ready?
Share your thoughts.
All right. First of all, I think that the union movement, and I think among our lawyers, we pretty much think that when this case comes up in a few days, that we're going to lose the case. And we think that because when Trump was able to appoint Gorsuch, it shifted the tide on the issue. The issue came up a few years ago in a case called Friedrichs. And with the death of Scalia, when they voted on the case, it was a 4-4 tie. So we expect that with Gorsuch on the board, that we'll probably lose it 5-4. But that's the court case. What the union movement is doing is we want people to know what this is really all about. And therefore, we're having next Saturday rallies all over the country so that people know what the issues are regarding this issue of fair share. For those listeners that may not know what it is, unions have been able to negotiate with state laws in most states a provision that if you don't join the union, you have to pay a fee for the services that the union provides.
Right.
Services for negotiation, legal services, health care, all the benefits that union members get, you have to pay a portion of that.
Right. Enforcing the contract. If someone is fired for an unjust cause, you have to go through an arbitration system. You have to pay lawyers and arbitrators and all that stuff. It's to fund the basic operations.
Right. And clearly, these freeloaders who don't want to pay, the portion that they're objecting to, they say, well, we don't like what unions say about certain politicians and favor politicians in elections. The laws prevent unions, and this is what people don't really know, from using union dues for political purposes. The laws prevent that. So that's when they say a fair share. They don't pay the full amount of the union dues, but there are deductions for those things that they don't really believe that the union should be doing.
Right.
There is an organization in Pennsylvania, among other places, which we refer to as the Commonwealth Foundation.
One of the state policy network think tanks all around the country. Pennsylvania's is known as the Commonwealth Foundation.
Yes, and they are trying to support this case where they would take away the rights of non-members to pay a fee. There's a campaign ready and waiting when this decision comes down. Yep. The literature is prepared, and their whole thrust is going to be, would you like a raise? Quit the union, and you don't pay dues, and you automatically get a raise. They have hired youngsters in other states. It hasn't hit Pennsylvania yet, to my knowledge, but they hire them knocking on doors and telling people, well, here, sign this card, and you can get an automatic raise. And what they tend to do is wear T-shirts representing the unions. And the more popular ones, if I mention, your listeners may know, if it's green, it's ASME, so they wear a green T-shirt when they go to an ASME household. If it's SEIU, they're wearing purple. If it's AFT, it's blue. And they're knocking on doors without going through telling them the whole story and say, sign this form and we'll get you a raise. And without understanding it, that's something that they're already in the process to do. But what the big thing here is, it's not just about the fair share.
Right.
It's
but
not
let me
just
ask
about
you
the
before
money.
you go on.
The real threat is it's an attempt to destroy and eliminate unions.
Right.
That's what's really behind this.
No, absolutely. But before you go on, what are they being asked to sign?
Well, a deduction, a form, and it varies in different states, a form that takes you off of dues that says, I do not want to pay union dues or fair share. And they're, basing it on what they assume is going to come from the Supreme Court to abolish that right.
Right, but it's not a decertification letter or anything.
But they're going to be going after members who are already dues-paying members. It's not just the fair share. That's a limited amount. They're going to be going after all of our members to weaken and to destroy the union, which is really what their goal is all about.
And ultimately, any sane, rational policy push from the left, any good education policies, any help the poor, any of that stuff, this is all designed to stop that and to destroy any movement forward.
That's right.
So, how do we, because as you've said, and I think you're absolutely right, I think conventional wisdom has this a 5-4 decision. I don't see Roberts, doing what he said he was going to do and honor decided law and call balls and strikes. I don't see Anthony Kennedy saying it's a states' rights issue and shouldn't be decided on a federal level. And I certainly don't see Gorsuch or Thomas or Alito, who called for this case, voting against it. So the question becomes, are we at a new moment, and is this the beginning of what's next for labor to start thinking about? Because obviously this is going to filter down into the private sector unions. This is going to harm all unions across this country.
Right now, it's focusing in on public sector employee unions.
Right, well, that's where the density is.
You're absolutely right. If this is successful, this movement, it's this private sector is their next target. There's no question about it. And the unions are getting prepared for this. Why our members need to know what's happening and what they're going to try to do to us. And so part of our job is to educate our members about these letters that are going to start to come, to let them know about the issues and what they can lose if the union is weaker. So we're not just we're assuming that we're going to lose, but we're not saying we're going to lose and we're walking away. We're preparing to fight. We're preparing to organize with our members. And I think people are going to be surprised. I think we're going to come out of this a lot stronger than when we've been in the last few years, because when the members understand what people are trying to do to them, this is not just about the unions, it's about the members, because they're the ones that are going to lose. I think we're going to come out stronger because we're going to fight just as hard to keep the protections that we have for our members these days.
Right. Well, what I've been saying for a while now, I mean, you go back to the Friedrichs case, I've been saying there's the potential that this bites the right wing in the behind, and we end up with a much more militant labor movement as opposed to one that's business friendly, if you will, the old business unionism model. There's a potential that people and I've been saying this for years, that the labor movement either has to morph into a model like the NRA where, you'll take my card from my cold, dead hands, or it goes away.
Oh, I agree with you, and I think that we're getting ready to fight. We're gearing up to fight. We're not walking away and just saying, oh, we're going to lose this case, and oh, woe is me. No, we're in for a fight, and we're going to fight, and we're going to win.
Let me ask you about the 24th, the big rally on the 24th, and there are some all over the country. We're planning on going to the one in Washington, D.C. What are you hoping comes out of that?
I hope that there's an awareness that we're waking up the union members. So they pay their dues, and okay, the union's there for me if I need it. It's like an insurance policy. But it's more than that. We have to get our members to be aware. And it's the public. And the reason for the rally, most people in the general population, they're not even aware of this case, the significance of it. And so we're having these rallies throughout the country to bring an awareness to the American public. Because if unions go down and they get weakened, the middle class goes down and the middle class loses. And that is a big part of this. It's not just about the union. It's what's going to happen to the rest of the country on all kinds of issues.
Ultimately, Ted, the union is the members. And I've always said, the right wing has done a masterful job of divorcing workers from their unions, just as they've done divorcing citizens from their government.
I agree. And when we look at the last presidential election, to me, one of the most upsetting things is some of these studies afterwards about how union members voted against their own self-interest, against themselves, because they were sold a bill of goods.
Well, it can't happen to me. They won't touch me. I'm going to be okay. And it takes me back to something George Meany said back, I think in the late 60s. How do you get a man to go on strike when he's making $10,000 a year? When his interests are in the job, how do you get them to, maybe we've done too good of a job.
Well, we have to reevaluate that.
Yeah. So last question I've got. I've had a bunch of people say, well, you know what needs to happen, Rick? We need a general strike. Any talk of action once this goes into law? How do you see this playing out?
No, I think that right now the action is really on the part of the unions to work on their own members, to awaken them to the threat to their organization, to their contracts, to their benefits. It's going to start out with an internal organizing campaign.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I don't mean to cut you off, but even if you're 100% successful in organizing your members, they've won this round, because what you haven't done is you haven't gone out and organized new members. And I think all of this busy work, all of this stuff that they keep throwing in the way, all of these reporting quotas and all of this stuff is designed to give you guys a lot of busy work to keep you just focused on what you've got and not growing out. And that's mission accomplished for them.
Well, that's what they may think, but I will tell you from my own organization, the American Federation of Teachers, we have been growing every year. Our membership is increasing. We are organizing, and that is something that's part of our DNA, I guess. Maybe not all unions see this happening, but we are on the rise, and we're increasing our membership, and we're organizing in spite of all these other attempts.
The hope is that regardless of what happens, that people wake up and, well, as I've said, a much more militant labor movement, I think, is what we need, of people who are active, engaged, not just in their unions, but also in their government. Ted, I appreciate the time. I wish you the best, and I'd love to have you come back again and talk with us as this continues.
I'm available. I'm at your beck and call. Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate it. Happy President's Day to you.
Thank you.
Our good friend Ted Kirsch, president of AFT Pennsylvania. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. And if you had theater tickets that evening to see Beauty and the Beast in Seattle, the show did not go on as planned. Musicians at the Fifth Avenue Theater, members of Local 76-493, had been on strike for a week. At issue was their compensation for performance. The union believed their wages were far below the industry standard for similar markets. The theater managers refused to budge. The union went out on strike, canceling 8 performances of the much-anticipated Disney Broadway musical. But this was the last night the theater stayed dark. Management brought in replacement musicians. The curtains rose with the scab musicians playing inside, while the picketers marched outside. The Musicians Union had a long history in Seattle. Local 76 was first formed in 1898. 60 years later, they joined the Black Musicians Local 493, integrating the union for the very first time. 18 members of the Local 76 participated in the Fifth Avenue Theater strike. 4 additional Disney musicians refused to play. Community solidarity for the strikers was strong. Each night, hundreds would join the picket lines as a brass band played outside the theater. Violinist Libby Poole Presley was impressed by this show of support, saying, "I was floored. Here were hundreds of people helping us out in a stunning show of labor and community solidarity. To us striking musicians, it felt like magic to have the power of that many people behind us." The magic of solidarity helped the musicians win a contract victory and end their strike. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Christy has an interesting tweet back at us. Said it's another nail in the coffin for unions. They will keep hammering until we are gone and the middle class does not exist. National right to work. Follow the money. And the money is, we know who the money is. The money's the Koch brothers. The money is the wealth class of this country. She goes on to say, until the union is decimated, and then they will cut their pay and their job. The raise is temporary. Their voice is silenced. And that's really the part of this that I go back to, if you remember Scott Walker in Wisconsin when he became governor, there was a billionaire woman who was the head of the ABC construction company out there. Her name eludes me at this moment, but she was just all, tingly in the panties going, when do we get right to work? And he's like, well, don't worry, we're going to get there. We're going to divide and conquer. We're going to do all this other stuff. And then we're going to get it to you. And you go, why would a billionaire woman want right to work? Why would they want this obscure little thing? And it's not obscure to them. It's power. It's an aphrodisiac. It's absolute control. That's really what they want. And also, to basically undo the entire 20th century. That is the plan here. And this was a major part of the New Deal. This was a major part of what built the largest, most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. And what you've got now are people who have forgotten it. I shouldn't say have forgotten it. They never knew it because our schools don't teach it and parents don't pass it down. The bloody fights that went on for the 8-hour day. The bloody fights that went on for overtime pay. The bloody fights that went on, well, for a share of the wealth that working people make. Maybe we have to fight these battles all over again. Maybe we, as I fear, the only way that things turn around is after a generation getting kicked in the teeth. Maybe that's it. Because clearly you have so many people who have been brainwashed by the fake news and by Fox and all the rest of them. Maybe we need it. Maybe we'll see what happens. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Just again, as I said, this case is going to happen. I think everybody agrees. It's going to go the wrong way. But But if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you got to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color.